Don't look at me, cowboy. I found her after they took everything. The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills of the small rural town, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. On the outskirts, a lone cowboy stirred in his modest home, the smell of fresh hay and morning dew filling the air. His name was Jack, a man whose life had been tied to the land for as long as he could remember. He rose early every day, tending to his horses, feeding his livestock, and checking the fences that stretched for miles around his property. Life had never been easy, but Jack took pride in his work, finding satisfaction in the simple routine that connected him to the earth and the animals he cared for so deeply. Jack's life wasn't only about the ranch, operation. There was someone who made his days brighter. Someone who brought warmth into the cold mornings and comfort after long, hard days. Her name was Emily. She had grown up in the same town, her laughter and kindness known to everyone. But what made her special to Jack wasn't just her smile or gentle nature. It was her strength. She had a way of standing tall even when life tried to knock her down. The two of them had met years ago at a town fair. Jack had been fixing a broken fence nearby, and Emily had tripped over a loose plank. Instead of laughing, he had helped her up, brushing the dirt from her dress. From that moment, their lives became intertwined, a bond built on trust, care, and a quiet understanding of each other's struggles. For a long time, things seemed to move at a steady, comforting pace. Jack and Emily worked side by side on the ranch. She would help him with the animals, feeding the calves and checking the fences, while he handled the heavier work. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sky fade into stars. Sometimes they would talk about dreams, about expanding the ranch, about a small house painted white, about a life full of laughter and love. Those moments felt like a sanctuary, a space where nothing could touch them, where the world outside their little haven didn't matter. But life, as Jack had learned long ago, had a way of changing everything without warning. One crisp morning, a group of strangers arrived in town. They were slick, polished, and spoke with a confidence that made people uneasy. They claimed to represent a development company, saying they had legal rights to acquire nearby properties. At first, Jack didn't pay much attention. He had dealt with paperwork, disputes, and misunderstandings before. But these people were different. They brought documents, lawyers, and a quiet menace that left the townspeople whispering in fear. Jack tried to reason with them, presenting his papers, his history on the land, and his rights as a property owner. He explained how the ranch had been in his family for generations, how every corner held memories and hard work. But the strangers didn't listen. They had money, influence, and a way of bending rules to suit their needs. Within days, notices were posted, and legal actions began. Jack felt a weight settling on his shoulders, a creeping dread that refused to leave. Emily watched quietly, her hands trembling as she packed small things that they could take with them. She tried to keep a brave face, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. This was more than just losing a house. It was losing a life they had built together. The thought of strangers taking their home, their animals, and the very land they loved was unbearable. They had worked too hard, fought too many battles to let it all slip away so easily. Despite the hopelessness, Jack refused to give up. He spent long hours speaking to lawyers, contacting local authorities and reaching out to friends who might help. But the more he tried, the clearer it became that this fight was bigger than anything he had faced before. The company had connections, influence, and people ready to enforce their claim no matter the consequences. Each day brought new threats, horses taken, fences destroyed, and the constant reminder that they could lose everything at any moment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily came to Jack with a quiet urgency in her voice. "Jack," she said, her hands clasped tightly, "they're going to take more than the land." I don't know what will happen if they come for us next." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for the first time Jack saw the fear he had tried to shield her from.
He took her hand in his, gripping it firmly. "We'll face it together," he said, though his own voice betrayed the worry he felt.
Pray. "No matter what happens, I promise I won't let them break us. But promises, no matter how heartfelt, are fragile in the face of power and greed. One cold morning, the inevitable happened." Operation. Men in suits arrived accompanied by law enforcement to enforce the company's claim. They came with trucks, chains, and the authority that left Jack feeling helpless. Animals were herded onto trailers, fences torn down, and the home they had built with love and sweat reduced to chaos. Jack tried to intervene, pleading, shouting, and even standing in the way of the trucks, but each attempt was met with cold indifference. Emily clung to Jack, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words that would haunt him forever. "Don't look at me, cowboy!" Her voice broke with emotion, and Jack could see the fear and shame in her eyes. "She didn't mean she didn't want him to care. She meant that the world had taken so much from her that she didn't know how to face it." She was scared, vulnerable, and forced into a situation beyond her control. Those words burned into Jack's heart, a reminder of everything they were losing. By the time the sun had fully risen, the ranch was empty. Jack stood amidst the ruins, his hands covered in dirt and splinters, his heart heavy with grief. He watched as Emily was taken away, her figure disappearing into the distance. He wanted to run after her, to fight, to do anything to protect her, but he was powerless. The world had conspired to take everything he held dear, and he was left with nothing but memories and the echo of her haunting words. That night, Jack sat alone on the porch of what was left of his home. The sky was dark, and the stars seemed distant and cold. He thought of Emily, wondering where she was, if she was safe, and if she remembered his promise. He thought of the ranch, the animals, the life they had built, and how quickly it had been torn apart. Pain and anger mixed within him, but beneath it all was a spark of determination. He would not let this be the end. He would find her. He would rebuild. He would face whatever came next, no matter how difficult. Even in despair, Jack knew that hope was all he had left. It was fragile, but it was there, burning quietly in his chest. He couldn't control the world or the people who had taken everything, but he could control his actions, his resolve, and his loyalty to Emily. He whispered her name into the night, a promise to himself and to her. "I will find you, no matter what it takes." And so, the first chapter of their story ended not with victory, but with loss. A loss so deep that it left scars on the heart and soul. Yet, beneath the pain, there was the seed of a journey that would test courage, patience, and the power of love. Jack's path was uncertain, the obstacles immense, but one thing was clear. He would not rest until he found Emily, until he made things right, until he reclaimed the life that had been stolen from them both. The night stretched long and silent over the empty ranch, but Jack stayed awake, planning, thinking, and remembering. Every memory, every laugh, every shared dream became fuel for the fight ahead. He could not change what had happened, but he could choose what to do next, and he would do it with every ounce of strength in him. The world might have taken everything, but it could not take his determination, his loyalty, or his love for Emily. The morning after the loss, Jack woke to a quiet so heavy it pressed against his chest. The ranch was empty, silent, stripped of life, and yet the air still carried faint traces of Emily's laughter and the smell of the hay they had worked together to stack. He sat on the porch, staring at the distant hills, thinking about how quickly everything had been taken from them. For a moment despair threatened to swallow him, but then he remembered the look in Emily's eyes when she whispered, "Don't look at me, cowboy." That memory became a spark, small, fragile, but enough to ignite determination. Jack knew he could not give up. He could not let those who had destroyed his home also destroy the bond he had with Emily. The first step was finding her. He had no idea where she had been taken, only vague hints from neighbors and whispers in town. Some said she had been forced onto a vehicle heading toward the neighboring county. Others said the men involved were hiding her somewhere far from the town. Each rumor seemed more uncertain than the last, but Jack clung to them like lifelines. He began his search in the early hours, before the town fully woke. On horseback, he traveled the roads he knew well, and the ones he had never dared to ride. He stopped at every crossroads, every diner, every small store, asking questions quietly, hoping not to draw attention. People were afraid to speak. The men who had taken Emily had a reputation. Powerful, dangerous, and willing to punish anyone who interfered.
Jack could see the fear in the eyes of those he questioned, but he also saw glimmers of sympathy.
Some remembered the days when Emily had helped them, the kindness she showed without expecting anything in return.
As the days passed, Jack faced obstacle after obstacle.
One morning he tracked a lead to an abandoned barn outside of town, only to find it empty. A sense of frustration gnawed at him, but he forced himself to stay patient. He reminded himself that rushing could lead to mistakes, and mistakes could cost Emily her safety. Another day he followed tracks through a muddy field after a heavy rain, believing they belonged to her. But the trail vanished into a dense forest, and he spent hours searching before returning exhausted and empty-handed. Each setback tested his resolve, but each also strengthened it. He could not stop. Along the way, Jack encountered people who offered unexpected help. A retired rancher who knew the region like the back of his hand gave him directions and warned him of dangerous areas. A local mechanic provided him with supplies and checked his horse for signs of fatigue. Even a young boy who had admired Jack and Emily's work on the ranch offered to help keep an eye out for any unusual activity. Every gesture, no matter how small, reminded Jack that he was not completely alone in his mission. Jack also had to face the constant reminder of what he had lost. Sometimes he would ride past the old barn where they had spent evenings talking, or the fence line where they had marked their plans for the future. Seeing the familiar landmarks empty and desolate fueled his anger and determination in equal measure. He spoke to Emily in his mind constantly, imagining her reactions, her voice, her fears. He promised her over and over again that he would find her, that he would not let those men win. One evening, Jack found a clue that gave him hope. A traveling merchant passing through town mentioned seeing a young woman matching Emily's description being taken toward a neighboring city. The merchant didn't know much, only that the woman had been accompanied by two men in dark suits and that they were in a rush, as if afraid someone might see them. Jack's heart raced. For finally, there was something concrete to follow.
He prepared his horse and set off under the cover of night, hoping to reach the area before the men could move her again.
Traveling at night was dangerous. The roads were uneven, and the darkness concealed hidden ditches, fallen branches, and wild animals. But Jack pressed on. Guided by determination and memory of the terrain, he moved silently, careful not to draw attention, and constantly checked for any signs of Emily or the men who had taken her. At times, exhaustion threatened to overtake him, but he forced himself to keep going, knowing that every moment wasted could mean she was further away. During this journey, Jack's thoughts often returned to the moment Emily had whispered, "Don't look at me." He remembered the shame and fear in her eyes, and it tore at him. He wished he could erase the fear, protect her from everything that had happened, and assure her that she had nothing to be ashamed of. That phrase, simple as it was, became a guiding force for him. It reminded him that he had to approach carefully, that Emily's trust needed to be regained, and that rushing or acting recklessly could endanger her further. After days of searching, Jack finally arrived at the outskirts of the city mentioned by the merchant. It was unfamiliar territory, crowded and noisy, far different from the quiet hills he was used to. He had to adapt quickly, moving among strangers, asking discreet questions, and observing everything around him. Each street corner, each alleyway became a potential clue. He watched people coming and going, trying to spot anyone who seemed out of place or suspicious. Narration. Every small detail mattered. It was during one of these observations that Jack noticed a pattern. Parade. Several shops and houses had new signs, boarded windows or sudden repairs, all signs of recent activity. He remembered what he had learned from the retired rancher. People often leave traces, even when they think they are careful. Narration. Following these subtle hints, Jack traced movement to a quiet, narrow street, where shadows stretched across the walls in the fading sunlight. There, he saw a glimpse of someone familiar, a woman who moved with a grace and poise that seemed familiar, someone whose hair caught the light in a way only Emily's did. Jack's heart pounded. Narration. He wanted to run to her, to call her name, but he knew he couldn't. The men accompanying her were close by, and any sudden move could put her in more danger. He had to be patient, careful, and strategic. He watched from a distance, noting the routines of the men, the way they moved, and the places they went. Every observation became a piece of a puzzle he was determined to solve. The days in the city were long and tense. Jack often went without proper sleep, riding his horse into the outskirts at night and returning before dawn. He survived on minimal food, just enough to maintain strength, and stayed focused on the goal. Every time he thought of Emily, he felt a mix of anger, sadness, and hope. He imagined her alone, scared and missing the life they had shared, and that thought kept him moving forward despite exhaustion. Along the way, Jack also reflected on their past, remembering the quiet moments on the ranch, the evenings spent repairing fences together, the laughter shared over spilled feed, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing a calf thrive under their care. These memories were bittersweet, reminding him of what was at stake and what he was fighting to restore. He understood that finding Emily wasn't just about rescuing her physically, it was about restoring hope, trust, and the life they both deserved. Then, finally, Jack received another small but important clue. A neighbor in the city had overheard a conversation about a warehouse on the edge of town, a place where people who had been taken were kept until decisions were made about them. It wasn't a certainty, but it was the first lead that felt real, tangible, something he could act on. Jack prepared himself for the next step carefully, planning how he might approach the warehouse without alerting the men. He studied the building, noting entrances, exits, and potential hiding spots. Jack knew the danger was growing. Each day Emily remained in the hands of those men, the risk to her safety increased. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he also felt a fierce determination rising. This was no longer just a search. It was a mission of rescue. Every step, every observation, every decision mattered. As the sun set, Jack positioned himself on a hill overlooking the warehouse. Shadows stretched across the building, and the sounds of the city faded in the distance. He waited patiently, watching for any sign of Emily or her captors. Every passing moment was tense, each movement potentially life-changing. And, through it all, he held on to one thought, one promise. He would not fail her. He would not let those who had taken everything from them win. He would find her, no matter the cost. The night deepened, and Jack remained vigilant. knowing that tomorrow could bring the breakthrough he had been waiting for.
He had traveled countless miles, faced danger, and endured sleepless nights, but his resolve had never wavered.
Bird. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in days, hope felt within reach. Emily was close. He could feel it in his heart, in the way the wind carried faint whispers of her presence.
Jack settled on the hill, keeping watch until the first light of dawn.
Desperation. The city slept below him, unaware of the cowboy who had come to reclaim what had been stolen. And as he stared at the warehouse, he whispered her name into the quiet night, a promise carried on the wind.
I will find you, Emily.
I will bring you home. Jack stayed on the hill long into the night, his eyes fixed on the warehouse below. Desperation. Shadows danced across the walls as the city slept, and he could just make out the faint shapes of people moving inside. He knew Emily had to be there somewhere, but he also knew rushing in without a plan could endanger her even more. Desperation. He had spent days tracking her, observing the men, learning their routines, and preparing for the moment when he could finally act. That moment had to be right. He remembered the first time he had seen her after the loss. The way her eyes held fear and shame, how she had whispered, "Don't look at me, cowboy." Those words echoed in his mind, and he understood what they meant. Desperation. Emily wasn't angry at him. She was terrified, overwhelmed, and unsure if anyone could save her. Jack felt a deep ache in his chest. He wanted to run to her, to wrap her in his arms and tell her everything would be okay, but he knew she needed him to be careful. He needed to be clever, patient, and strong. Jack spent the night studying the warehouse. He noticed patterns, when the men left for supplies, how they checked the entrances, and when they were most alert. Desperation. He marked each observation in his mind, creating a mental map of the building. He also studied the surroundings, alleyways, back doors, and windows. Every detail mattered. He knew that any mistake could put Emily in greater danger. When the first light of dawn broke, Jack finally felt ready. He waited until the streets were quiet, then moved silently toward the warehouse. He kept to the shadows, his horse tied safely behind a row of abandoned buildings. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of his promise. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was taken. It was about rescuing Emily, restoring her hope, and showing her that she was not alone. Peering through a small gap in the warehouse wall, Jack caught his first real glimpse of her. Emily was sitting on a wooden crate, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes looked distant, and she seemed to shrink even smaller in the presence of the men around her. Jack's heart clenched. She was alive, but she looked so vulnerable, so different from the strong woman he knew. He had to reach her carefully. One wrong move could ruin everything. He waited, watching as the men went about their routine. There were two of them, tall and imposing, speaking quietly but sharply, as if rehearsing instructions or threats. They didn't notice Jack hiding in the shadows, and he used that to his advantage. He memorized their movements, planning his approach. He couldn't just charge in. He had to distract them, create a moment where Emily could slip away, and guide her to safety. Hours passed, and Jack's patience was tested. He kept his distance, moving slightly to stay hidden, always keeping Emily in sight.
He whispered her name softly, hoping she could hear it, hoping it would reach her.
Emily, it's me. Jack, I'm here.
He didn't know if she could hear him, but it felt necessary to let her know he hadn't given up, that he was still fighting for her. Finally, a small opportunity presented itself. One of the men left the room, leaving only a single guard near Emily.
Desk. Jack saw his chance. He crept closer, using crates and shadows as cover, inch by inch, until he was close enough to reach her.
Emily glanced up at him, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Fear flickered in her gaze, but so did recognition.
Desperation. Jack, is that you? His heart soared, and he nodded subtly. He motioned for her to stay quiet and pointed to the back door of the warehouse, which he had noted as unlocked during his observations. Desperation. Emily hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. The guard noticed her movement and began to approach. Desperation. Jack acted instantly. He threw a small rock to the far side of the room, creating a noise that drew the guard away. Heart pounding, he grabbed Emily's hand, guiding her toward the door. The moment felt endless. But every step brought the risk of discovery. Emily clung to Jack, her grip tight but trembling, and he whispered encouragement.
We're almost there. Just a little further.
They moved silently, using crates and shadows for cover, inching closer to the exit. The tension was unbearable. One misstep could alert the men, but Jack's careful planning and steady nerves kept them moving. Finally, they reached the door. Desperation. Jack opened it slowly, peeking outside to make sure the street was clear. A quiet alley stretched before them, empty except for a few stray cats and discarded boxes. Desperation. He guided Emily through, keeping low and moving as quickly as they could without making noise. The freedom of the open air felt surreal after the suffocating darkness of the warehouse. Burst. Emily's face softened slightly, and she allowed herself a small breath of relief. Once they were a safe distance from the building, Jack led her to a small abandoned barn he had spotted nearby. It was hidden from the main street, and he knew they could rest there for a short while. Desperation. Emily sank onto a pile of hay, exhausted and trembling. Jack sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Desperation. It's okay, Emily. We're safe now. I've got you. Tears streamed down her face as she finally allowed herself to break. The fear, shame, and pain she had carried for days poured out in quiet sobs. Jack held her, silent but steady, letting her release everything she had held inside. He didn't rush her, didn't speak words she might not be ready to hear. He simply stayed, a steady presence she could lean on.
After some time, Emily lifted her head, wiping her tears.
I thought I'd never see you again, she whispered, her voice fragile but full of emotion. Jack squeezed her hand gently. Desperation. I promised I'd find you. I never stopped looking. Bert. I never will. She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt, and found none. His determination was unwavering, and it gave her a sense of hope she hadn't felt in days. Even as they shared this quiet moment, Jack knew they weren't completely safe. The men who had taken Emily were still out there, and he couldn't assume they would give up easily. He needed to get her out of the city, away from anyone who might recognize her or follow them. They would have to travel carefully, slowly, and with caution. Jack had learned long ago that patience and planning were just as important as courage and strength. Desperation. That evening, as the sky turned golden with sunset, Jack and Emily prepared to leave the barn. He packed a small bag with essentials, water, food, a blanket, and made sure Emily had what she needed. Brrr. She moved slowly, still weak from the fear and stress she had endured, but she trusted him enough to follow his lead. He guided her back to his horse, careful to keep her hidden from any passers-by. As they rode quietly through the outskirts of the city, Emily clung to Jack, her head resting against his back. She didn't speak much, but he could feel her breathing slowly even out, the tension in her body easing slightly. For Jack, every mile they traveled was a victory. Each step took them further from danger and closer to the safety he had promised. He didn't allow himself to relax yet. There was still a journey ahead, still a path to freedom. Along the way, Jack kept talking softly to her, sharing memories of the ranch, the animals, and the quiet evenings they had spent together. Each story was a reminder of better times, of the life they had fought to protect. Emily began to respond with small smiles, her eyes lighting up briefly at the familiar recollections. It was a slow process, rebuilding trust and comfort, but Jack knew it was just as important as physical safety. Night fell again, and they found a small, hidden spot in the woods to rest. Jack kept watch while Emily slept, his mind never resting. He thought about the days ahead, the distance they needed to cover, and the challenges they might face. But he also thought about her smile, her voice, and the courage she had shown even in captivity. Those thoughts strengthened him, reminding him why he had embarked on this mission in the first place. Jack understood something essential that night. Finding Emily was not the end of their journey. It was only the beginning. They had escaped immediate danger, but rebuilding their lives, reclaiming their strength, and restoring the trust broken by those who had taken everything would take time. He was ready to face it all, step by step, as long as he had her by his side. As the moon rose high above the trees, Jack whispered once more, holding Emily's hand gently in his. We're not out of danger yet, but we're together. That's what matters. I promise I'll protect you, always. Emily's eyes met his, a mixture of fear, relief, and hope. For the first time since the nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe in the promise, in the man who had refused to give up on her. And so, in the quiet of the woods, with the city far behind and the future uncertain, Jack and Emily took their first steps toward freedom. The path ahead was not easy, but for the first time in days, hope felt real, tangible, and within reach. Jack knew the next challenge would be even harder, but he also knew one truth above all else. He would face it, and he would never stop fighting for her. The morning air was crisp and quiet as Jack and Emily emerged from the small hidden spot in the woods. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold, signaling the start of a new day. Jack had kept watch throughout the night, his senses alert, his mind focused. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant sound of the city beyond reminded him that danger was still close, and caution was essential. Emily moved slowly beside him, still weak from the days of fear and uncertainty. But with each step, her confidence grew.
Jack had planned the next phase carefully.
They could not return to the city. The men who had taken her might still be searching, and they had resources to track her. Instead, Jack led Emily toward the countryside, toward areas he knew well, away from roads and towns where they could be spotted. The journey was long and physically demanding, but Jack's determination never wavered. Each mile brought them closer to safety, closer to a life they had almost lost, and closer to reclaiming their peace. Along the way, Jack shared quiet stories to ease Emily's mind. He reminded her of the nights on the porch, the mornings spent feeding the horses, and the simple joys of life on the ranch. Emily listened, a small smile breaking through the shadow of fear. The memories grounded them, reminding them both of what they were fighting for, a life filled with freedom, trust, and love. Despite the physical exhaustion, Jack remained vigilant. He knew the men who had stolen everything from them would not give up easily. Jack had seen the lengths people could go for greed and power, and he knew caution was their best ally. They traveled along forest paths, avoiding main roads and taking shelter in barns or hidden clearings along the way. Jack's experience on the ranch and in the wilderness became their shield. He knew how to navigate the terrain, where to find water, and how to stay out of sight. One afternoon, they reached a river that marked the edge of the county. Jack led Emily to a shallow spot where they could cross safely. As they waded through the cool water, Emily paused, looking back toward the distant city. I thought I would never leave that place alive, she whispered. Jack squeezed her hand gently.
You're safe now.
Bert. We're moving forward. Nothing can stop us together. Brr. The words brought a quiet strength to Emily, and she nodded, drawing courage from the steady presence of Jack beside her. As they continued their journey, Jack noticed subtle signs that they were being watched. Brr. A broken branch here, footprints there, small hints that someone might be following them. His heart rate quickened, but he remained calm, knowing that panic would only make them vulnerable. Bird. He adjusted their path, moving through denser woods, taking longer routes to ensure their trail was hidden. Every decision mattered, and Jack's sharp instincts guided them. Brr. By late afternoon, they found shelter in an old abandoned farmhouse. Jack made sure it was secure before allowing Emily to rest fully. Brr. He prepared a small meal with the supplies they had carried and checked over her to make sure she was unharmed. Emily sat quietly, still pale and tired, but a sense of relief softened her features. She looked at Jack, gratitude and admiration in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Breath. Jack smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No thanks needed. Rest. I promised I'd find you, and I will keep that promise."
That evening, Jack spoke of plans for the future.
They could not return to the ranch immediately, not until the legal battles and threats had been resolved. But they could begin rebuilding their life, step by step. Jack suggested moving to a small, safe property he knew nearby, where they could start fresh. Emily listened, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in weeks. The idea of a new beginning, free from fear and uncertainty, gave her strength. During the night as they rested, Emily spoke of her time in captivity. She shared her fears, the loneliness, and the moments when she had thought all hope was lost. Jack listened patiently, never interrupting, offering comfort through his presence. He knew that healing from such an experience would take time, and he was ready to be patient. Emily's trust had to be rebuilt gradually, and Jack understood that words alone could not do it. He offered actions, loyalty, and consistent care, the foundation for restoring her confidence. The following days were filled with careful travel, planning, and preparation. Jack guided Emily through safe paths, avoiding towns and keeping to the woods when necessary. He made sure they had food, water, and warm clothing, and he taught her small skills for staying safe while traveling. Emily absorbed everything quietly, her confidence growing with each passing day. She had survived fear and uncertainty, and now, with Jack's guidance, she began to feel capable and strong once again. Finally, after days of careful journeying, Jack brought Emily to the small property he had mentioned. It was modest but secure, surrounded by open fields and a few trees that offered shelter. The house was old but sturdy, with enough space for them to live comfortably. Emily's eyes widened as she took in the sight.
"It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack smiled, a mix of relief and pride filling him.
"It's ours to rebuild," he said. "Step by step, we'll make it home again." Over the next weeks, Jack and Emily began the slow process of rebuilding. They repaired the house, fenced in areas for animals, and planted a small garden. Every action, no matter how small, became a symbol of resilience and hope. They laughed again, shared meals, and found comfort in the daily routines that connected them to the land and to each other. Each day, Emily's smile returned a little more, and Jack's heart lightened. The weight of fear and uncertainty gradually lifted as they created a life that was safe, stable, and full of possibility. Though the physical dangers had passed, Jack and Emily still had to face the emotional scars left by the ordeal. They spoke openly about trust, fear, and resilience. Jack encouraged Emily to express her feelings, to acknowledge the pain, and to embrace hope for the future. Emily learned that vulnerability was not weakness. It was a bridge to healing.
And Jack learned that patience, understanding, and unwavering support were essential to helping her reclaim her strength. One morning as the sun rose over the fields, Emily stood beside Jack, looking out at the horizon. "We made it," she said softly. Jack took her hand, feeling the warmth and strength in her grip. "Yes," he replied. Narration. We did. And this is just the beginning. Nothing can take this from us again. In that moment, they both understood that true safety and happiness were not just about property or possessions, but about trust, love, and the bond they shared. The days turned into weeks, and life on the small property grew steady and peaceful. Jack and Emily tended to their tasks, cared for animals, and slowly rebuilt a sense of normalcy. Neighbors occasionally stopped by, offering support and kindness, reminding them that community and connection were part of the healing process. Emily began to smile more freely, her laughter returning to the home that had once felt empty and hopeless. Jack also made sure to address the past, seeking legal advice and ensuring that the men who had taken everything could no longer threaten them. The process was slow, but Jack's persistence ensured that justice was served and their rights were protected. Emily watched him work tirelessly, and her respect and trust in him grew even stronger. She realized that true courage wasn't only physical bravery, but also the persistence to protect and rebuild, no matter the obstacles. Months passed, and Jack and Emily finally felt a sense of completion. The small property was thriving, the house warm and welcoming, and their lives filled with peace and hope. They had faced fear, loss, and uncertainty, yet they had emerged stronger and more connected than ever. The bond between them was unbreakable, built on trust, resilience, and shared determination. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack and Emily sat on the porch, holding hands and watching the sky change colors. Emily rested her head on Jack's shoulder, a quiet contentment in her expression. "I never thought I could feel safe again," she said softly. Jack kissed her forehead gently. "Desperation. Joe is buying many. You are safe now, Emily. Always. Desperation. And I'll do everything to keep it that way." She smiled, tears of relief and happiness glistening in her eyes. Their journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had taught them the value of love, patience, and perseverance. They had faced the darkest moments together, and their shared strength had carried them through. Jack had kept his promise, and Emily had reclaimed her life step by step with courage and trust. Together they had built not just a home, but a life filled with hope, resilience, and enduring love. As night fell and the stars twinkled above the fields, Jack and Emily looked out at the land they had reclaimed, basking. It was not just the property or the animals that mattered. It was the life they had fought for, the trust they had rebuilt, and the bond that had grown stronger through every trial. They knew the world could still be harsh and unpredictable, but they also knew that together they could face anything. And in that quiet moment, under the vast sky and gentle light of the moon, they found peace. Their journey had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately brought them closer than ever before. They had lost everything. Yet in the end they had found what truly mattered: love, trust, and the courage to face the future together.